Welcome. This is Dr. J. Kent Gregory, and we'll be discussing at least part one of Strategic Management, Chapter 7. And this is from Frank Rothermel's Strategic Management, fifth edition, that came out in 2020. And we'll be going over innovation and entrepreneurship. For the most part, we'll be focusing in on the innovation arc or life cycle today in part one. So, a couple case studies here. An entrepreneur had an idea. The goal was to dominate the video rental market, and the stock price had climbed by over 5,000% in 2004. It was one of the hottest companies in the United States, and it went into major decline. 83% of analysts said sell in 2006. And in fact, the owners themselves tried to sell the company. So the question is which company is this? Name that company. Year 1998, when it started. Netflix. So this is Netflix that we're talking about. The next one, name that company. Year is 2002. Entrepreneur had an idea. An online social network where you link with friends and contacts, you publish personal updates and news, share personal photos, you list interests and hobbies, you publish comments and messages, and it's generally called the grandfather of social networks. So which one do you think this is? It's Friendster, not Facebook. It's Friendster. And sitting here in the early part of October 2020, I bet few of you all have even heard of Friendster. So the lesson to be learned from those two cases is, certain things are, I suppose, unpredictable. But at the same time, though, where do they fall, for our purposes, where do they fall on the innovation process? And where did they end up succeeding in the case of Netflix or failing in the case of Friendster? So the first step is the idea stage. This is the basic vision of the product or the process. And it's really based on abstract concepts. There's nothing tangible at this point. Intangible, of course, I mean that loosely if we're talking about a process, but it's really of little or no value at this very initial stage. And then the next stage are invention, or is invention. And this is the transformation of the idea into the tangible product or into that process. So when we look over here, if right over here, if the product or process is useful, novel, and non-obvious, so those are key things, it can receive a patent. So the positives of developing a patent rather, is that for 20 years you get protection, and you're allowed to take example of monopoly pricing because you're the only one out there producing it. So you have this protection for 20 years. One example we see of this are prescription drugs. Now the negatives is that if you do apply for a patent and are granted one, you do have that 20 years of protection and you can monopoly price for those 20 years. The negatives are that you must release details of the invention, and the knowledge has got to be available to your competitors. So these are essentially your trade secrets. So there are obviously trade-offs when you receive a patent, and it's around this time that you want to think about applying for a patent and whether that fits what you want to do or not. The next stage is the innovation stage, and this is actually the process of commercializing the invention. This is where you convert that invention into a good or a service that the customer will pay for. And here's a little schematic from Frank Rothermel's Strategic Management, and it's the diagram of the intersection of novel, useful, and implemented. And there you have the actual innovation. And the next stage, and the final stage that we'll talk about here in part one, is the imitation stage. So one thing to keep in mind is that innovation is not always easy to defend. The great example of this is Friendster versus Facebook. So Friendster was not able to defend its process, for lack of a better word, its product against imitation by Facebook. So keep this in mind as you're consulting your clients or even as you're starting your own business. All successful innovations will face imitation at some point. So this brings us back perhaps to our VRIO process. Is the innovation easy to imitate? And can you erect barriers to entry for potential competitors? Well, that brings us to the end of part one of innovation and entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll continue on with part two, where we talk about the life cycle of products and innovations. Thank you very much.